flights in its airspace. Crystal Gamancing, Global News.
Well, hello, everyone. We will be starting momentarily. Thank you very much for attending tonight's virtual hour with Biljana Belamaric. We'll see.
Just as you were starting to talk, there was a big thunder over here. So the gods are with you.
Excellent, excellent. Wonderful.
I hope that it doesn't interfere with our internet connection, though.
Hopefully not. So wonderful. Well, we'll start momentarily.
Starting to talk, there was a big thunder over here. So the gods are with you.
Well, why don't we begin, Biljana? Well, so for everybody, I'm really excited. My name is Meto Koloski. I'm the president of the United Macedonian Diaspora, and this is probably I want to say our 20th or so virtual hours since COVID-19 started hitting the United States pretty hard. And we had to take all of our events from physical events to online. And I'm so pleased that since March, we've had close to 80,000 views on our various videos combined. And so it's great to be back on this beautiful Monday. I know, Biljana, by you, it's thunderstorming. For our participants watching on Facebook, thank you very much for participating. Tonight's virtual hour between United Macedonian Diaspora and its Young Leaders Program, Generation M, is on the topic of online resources for Macedonian language learning and maintenance with Dr. Biljana Belamaric Wilsley, who's the Executive Director of the Macedonian Language E-Learning Center. And their website is macedonianlanguage.org. And so Biljana is going to do a fantastic job, without a doubt, on telling you more about the Macedonian Language E-Learning Center. Just a few things here. Myself, I'm quite honored that Biljana several years ago asked me to serve on the board. I'm probably the only non-PhD academic that sits on the board. And so Thank you, Biljana, for giving me that honor and helping out as much as I can, and helping your amazing mission to promote, preserve the Macedonian language. And so Biljana, who was born and raised, and she's going to tell you more, but she was born and raised in Macedonia, earned her master's degree in English as a second language, and her second master's in Slavic languages and literature, and then continued her PhD studies in instructional technology for language learning with multimedia and online technologies. And so she has a great deal of experience in developing and teaching Macedonian language programs, tutorials, distance learning, online education. And so I'm really excited that she's sort of like the third speaker in a series of events that we've hosted with Dr. Victor Friedman, followed by Dr. Christina Kramer, and now we have another Dr. Biljana. And so Biljana, welcome. I am going to allow you to co-host so that you could put your slideshow for our audience that are participating tonight. So welcome, Biljana. How are you?
Thanks so much for that illustrious introduction. I appreciate it. I'm very honored to be in the company of people that you just mentioned, like Dr. Friedman and Dr. Kramer, all of whom are idols in our field of Macedonian linguistics and language studies for sure. Dr. Kramer, people may know also, is the author of the only Macedonian textbook that is being used at the universities here in the US. So it's a pleasure to be here as part of this series, but also an honor to follow such amazing people who have accomplished so much in their careers. And today's topic, of course, is online resources for Macedonian language learning and maintenance. And I'll talk a little bit about what do we mean by learning and what do we mean by maintenance. But I just wanted to give you a little bit more of background, building on what Meto just talked about myself. I am originally from Skopje, born and raised there. I've lived in the US for about 25 years. And I founded the Macedonian Language E-Learning Center in the distant year of 2007. Because as I was studying about all the resources in my undergraduate work with English as a second language and then later with the Slavic languages, I noticed a real discrepancy between what materials there were available for Macedonian versus certainly English, but some of these other Slavic languages as well, like Russian. There was just a plethora of materials that our teachers of Russian could send us to. And in comparison, it seemed like what we had for Macedonian was pretty much non-existent. And so because of my background, I felt like I was uniquely fortunate that I would be able to develop some of these materials and work on bridging this gap that we have for Macedonian materials. And I first started because my own family, I have 3 daughters, I wanted to pass on this language to them. And my husband as well, thankfully, was interested in learning this language. So I started with my own kind of immediate needs as a learner and a developer at the same time, as someone who wanted to maintain her language in the diaspora. And so everything that we'll talk about today are things that I give as advice to myself and my family. So it kind of starts very personal from me. And I'm very honored that I'm able to share some of this and that we are able to present this event for you today, especially because we've collaborated with the United Macedonian Diaspora for many years now, and I've presented at some of the conferences. And I personally feel fortunate to know Meto and that he is such an avid supporter of our cause, as well as a mentor for me really on the marketing side of things. I know a lot about the language learning. I know a lot about the language and teaching it online, as we've been doing for the last 13 years. But I don't know very much about marketing. So he has been a godsend as far as I'm concerned to help us kind of spread the word about what we're trying to do here. So
thank you, Biljana.
Very honored.
I think it's, obviously United We Can is UMD's motto, and we have to work together. And so it's a pleasure to help you and the Macedonian Language E-Learning Center.
Well, thanks so much. So the goal of today's talk is really to talk about online resources for maintaining and learning Macedonian and the contexts in which we maintain and learn Macedonian. But I want to say that I don't have all the answers, and I hope that you will contribute to this conversation, whether you are someone who feels connected to the Macedonian immigrant community or not, whether you've managed to maintain or teach Macedonian to your own family and friends, or if you're a learner yourself. The resources we'll share with each other today will enrich your Macedonian language toolbox. And I can't be comprehensive in just an hour. Certainly just listing all the websites would take much longer than that. But I hope that we can provide you with some useful starting points as you're starting to think about these topics and maybe try some of these things in your own life. I have prepared some starting points for our conversation, but I do want to hear from you in the chat so this can be a conversation and not a monologue. I do want to say there's some rules of the game. Please be respectful and tolerant of diverse opinions. Please be concise and stay on topic. And since I am not quite versed yet with Zoom, I'm going to rely on Meta to ask some of the questions that you might be posing as I'm presenting and showing some of my slides today. So before we delve into the resources, the meat of what we're going to talk about today, it's important to consider all the complexity of the linguistic and social context of immigrants and learners of Macedonian. And why is it that I'm grouping these two groups together in our presentation today? So why language maintenance and learning all at the same time? Well, what we mean by language maintenance is sustaining your level of native knowledge of the language. Surely you've heard, if you don't use it, you'll lose it. So how do we make sure that we don't lose it? Here also we can talk about language preservation, making sure that we don't lose our language, and protecting our language from the influx of Macedonianized words, or Macedo-English as its own variety of Macedonian. Now, that variety of Macedonian is valid. As a linguist, I appreciate all varieties, but it will mark you as belonging to a different group than people who live in Macedonia. In a sense, the moment of your immigration is a fork in the road. Your language will be changing a different way than the language in Macedonia is changing. As Dr. Friedman mentioned in his talk a few weeks ago, the only language that's not changing is a dead one, which is actually a quote from linguist David Crystal. So it's important for all of us to recognize that and accept that as something that's going to happen whether we like it or not. If you want to claim that your language has not diverged, you have to stay tethered to the changes happening in Macedonia through communication channels, even passive communication like reading. The best thing, of course, would be to go travel there as much as possible, but that's expensive. And if you have a large family, it's even more expensive. Now with COVID, that's not even possible. So because of the situation, that's the impetus behind providing some of these resources for today's presentation. Tied to this topic of maintenance is also acquisition. When we talk about learning or language acquisition, we mean learning that language as a first language by absorbing it from the environment. In opposition to language learning, whereas you're going to a class, whether it's a formal class or an online class with a tutor where it's more informal, you're actually focusing on that as a subject. Acquisition is more just learning it by absorbing it from the environment. And from every aspect you can consider, acquisition is different from learning. But because brain plasticity decreases as we age, it impacts how we acquire and how we learn a language. What is the same in both cases is that we get the benefits of the cognitive function improving from bilingualism and multilingualism, something that Dr. Kramer also talked about a little bit greater length. It's also important to recognize that maintaining, acquiring, learning the language is a difficult feat, even in the best of circumstances, especially in the face of day-to-day life and demands in the diaspora, where languages much more populous than Macedonian are competing for our attention. It does not happen automatically, and it requires planning and strong motivation. Speaking of motivation, one of the reasons why I chose to talk about language maintenance and language learning in one presentation is because immigrants are often the reason why learners choose to study Macedonian. I did a survey in 2013 of users from the Macedonian Language E-Learning Center website, and it was published in the Calico Journal. And I also did my dissertation in 2015, which looked at more in-depth how learners are learning with online resources specific to Macedonian. And both of these studies showed that learners are choosing to study Macedonian most often for integrative and emotional reasons. In other words, integrating into a community, integrating into their ethnic identity, or love or friendship, someone who is a loved one or that they're friends with speaks Macedonian or hails from Macedonia. Although sometimes they also do it for instrumental reasons, such as Peace Corps volunteers volunteering in Macedonia, for example, being sent there on their mission. A second reason why I think these two groups are good to talk about in one presentation is that immigrants can also support learners. It actually creates a larger community of users of Macedonian. So it's also in our best interest as speakers to support these learners. However, my dissertation showed that often in our communities, we are not as encouraging of language learners as we could be, and this impacts their motivation. Sometimes we squabble about correctness, and our reluctance to admit when we don't know something can be very demotivating for these learners. In teaching, we want to use authentic materials. So they can be very similar to the materials that we use for language maintenance or language acquisition. But one caveat I want to add here is that if the materials that we're using for learning are not gradual, motivation will suffer and frustration will grow. And maintaining motivation in the face of pulls of everyday life is really key. So we have to be really deliberate about how we present the material. Next, let's take a look at some of the complex linguistic and social contexts for maintenance and learning of Macedonian. So as we've mentioned a couple of times already, Dr. Friedman and Dr. Kramer both talked about some of the linguistic complexities that pertain to Macedonian. And if you didn't get a chance to participate in the talks live, you can always take a look at both of those recordings that we have on the United Macedonian Diaspora through their communications. I got them via email. Change over time due to external influences can happen, for example, such as language contact or globalization and technological modernization. You may be familiar with the rise of a lingua franca, a general language that everybody can understand, present day English, but in the past that happened with French, that happened with German. In addition, we have changes over time due to technological advances where we get new items that we want to name, such as a computer or the internet, for example. Change over time can also happen due to internal influences like mass media of communication. Certain centers rise and now their dialects become prestigious, such as the capital, for example. Education is institutionalized in the standard language. And so then people start to move across geographic regions and people start to move across social strata, impacting their language change. Language academies are created in some cultures where the language is standardized. So remember, again, as an immigrant, we're on a forked path. And for Macedonian especially, our language has long been a symbol of our identity. I remember as a child in elementary school in Macedonia, it was entrenched in us that really our language is our identity. Our language is our symbol of ethnicity. And that was so even before the existence of our independent country in the 90s. And so this is really a part of our identity and our ethnic marker. So it makes sense that in this context, we try to maintain our language and encourage others to learn it. And that's a positive force on maintenance and learning. But at the same time, when we're trying to communicate in our day-to-day lives, living in countries where Macedonian is not the main form of communication, for most people, there are simply not as many opportunities to use it. So this becomes a negative force on maintenance or acquisition. You may be living in a majority Macedonian community if you're one of those lucky ones, and you may have more opportunities. And therefore, in that case, maybe that impact of living in a different country may be as best as neutral. But even in those communities, learners can perceive a stratification system, and one that's especially judgmental against those who may not have been able to tether their language to the changes in the language of Macedonia, and by extension, those who have been labeled as not speaking as natives. And related to this topic is this question of what's correct. I see this from time to time in social media. What is the correct word for this? Or what is the correct way to say that? And almost inevitably somewhere in the comments, you'll hear or you'll see, well, that's not correct. Whatever you gave is archaic, or don't answer that if you don't know it. Now, how do learners perceive this kind of squabbling among native speakers or near native speakers? I've heard them say, well, if you can't even decide what's correct in your language, how can I possibly learn it? And Dr. Kramer pointed out in her talk that our dialects and our language variation is our treasure. It is a symbol of our past. It's all the historical and linguistic events that make us unique, both by connecting us and distinguishing us from each other. When we are answering questions like this one, when there is a teaching opportunity, we need to mention some of this linguistic complexity rather than squabble over what's correct and not. It really is an opportunity for us to nurture this diversity and pass it on. Now, does that mean that everything that appears out there is correct? Of course not. In linguistics, we distinguish between prescriptiveness and descriptiveness. Prescriptive grammars are what language academies and codifiers of the standard language prescribe. Descriptiveness is what native speakers actually say. Sometimes those can be different. The codifier's focus is often on the written word and the standard language in literature or media. So we can hold the written word of that standard language written by educated people as the most correct, because it does not undergo language change as fast as the spoken word, for example. But we need to understand that even among those educated native speakers of the standard language, there may be differences in opinion on some matters. Most recently, I read a column about how the word lycée, which is a collective plural noun, actually is a plural word, and it needs to be aligned with plural adjectives and plural verbs rather than the neuter adjectives and neuter verbs that we have seen in some literature and some written down word. So this is a valid discussion that people can have about whether this word is actually neuter or plural. And both are correct. But on the other side of the spectrum is machine translation, for example. I've seen some translations that break the rules of the language. There's a wrong subject-verb agreement, for example. That's plain wrong. No native speaker would ever say, yeah, that's acceptable. Where a dialectal word or a forgotten bit of grammar fits is not with machine translation that people will say that's completely wrong. It's rather than prescribing these dialectal or borrowed terms, we need to be open to describing it as one stage of language change, understanding the factors that lead to that language change. In fact, when we're judging correctness, I would say the wrong question is to say, what is correct? Instead, what we need to ask is, how would a native speaker say it? Because in the context that a native speaker is using it, or in the context of a community where you are trying to use your language or maintain your language, it may be different. So when you are maintaining your language, when you are learning the Macedonian language, is it so that you are understood in a particular community? Is it so that you are perceived as belonging to that community? A student of mine once told me the story of how she learned Turkish. She actually visited an old Muslim priest, an Hoca. And so the Turkish she learned in these interactions was archaic. It was full of pomp and circumstance. When she tried to use it outside of that setting, when she was doing her research in Turkey, people thought she spoke like an old priest, and they were all amazed. Why would anybody in today's day and age in modern Turkish society talk like that? But the community where she learned it and where she did her research, that was 100% appropriate. It got her what she needed. It got her the information, and she was able to complete her work. So if those are the circles within which you're maintaining your language and it serves your primary purpose, I don't believe anybody has the right to say that that's not correct. So looking at this complex linguistic context, we also have to start looking at the social context in which we are maintaining our language and in which learners are learning. In this complex social context, we are currently in the age of COVID, so that is also impacting it. And when we take a look at some of the social aspects, we may find ourselves in situations where we have more resources versus fewer resources. So in these dichotomies that I will present, we'll look at more resources on the left side of my verses, and on the right side, there'll be the area of fewer resources. Just because your situation is somewhere on the spectrum doesn't mean that everyone's is there. And so there's a lot of complexity and diversity here. So looking at you as a speaker or a learner, if you have migrated temporarily, you're just here for a semester as an exchange student, or you have come just for a particular post that's only going to last a few years, you will have more resources to maintain your language because you're trying to keep those ties to the mother country, right? Versus if you're here permanently, you may not have as many resources because you are now refocusing all your attention into fitting in and building a life here. If you've migrated with family members or versus alone, versus you're a second or third generation immigrant, you will have more resources if you have your family members around you with whom you can talk and you are using the language day in and day out, versus if you're alone, especially in a community that maybe doesn't have that many Macedonians. And if you were second or third generation, then your grandparents maybe who raised you have passed on, and you have even fewer resources to maintain that language. Your physical and online community also plays a role. If you are a current immigrant, what we call the generation of digital natives, you probably have a lot of online community connections to people in Macedonia. So you are able to stay more in touch with people in Macedonia, use your language more through that. Versus if you are in the old wave of immigrants, people who came here a long time ago as pechalbari, people who went to basically work, right, and go home and send money home. You may have come in groups, and so those people had each other to rely on. So they had maybe less resources than people today via the internet, but certainly not that much, and had each other. And then looking at people who are the new wave of immigrants, maybe who arrived shortly before the digital natives, but arrived alone and not in a group, they may have even fewer resources for maintaining their language. Additionally, existing versus non-existing community and support is very important. If you land in a place here in the US where you actually have a Macedonian community around you, of course, you'll have more resources to maintain that. There are areas here where I've even heard there's an igra orna, and people can not just maintain their language, but actually engage in social activities in Macedonian communities, building on their knowledge of Macedonian culture. If you land in a place like I did, where there isn't really that kind of support, it makes it more difficult. You have fewer resources to maintain the language. And then another aspect that's important is whether you're part of the contiguous, in other words, diaspora, in other words, countries around Macedonia, or even I would say in the Balkans, versus somewhere far away like the United States. If you are closer, number one, you can visit more often, it's cheaper to visit, but also some of those surrounding countries around Macedonia, and even as far as the Balkans, Russia, let's say, have more interest in teaching this language. And because it's close, and so there are sociopolitical ramifications, there's more resources for you to lean on. If you are farther away, their connection is a little bit weaker. One area I'm going to mention here is Australia. I've heard wonderful things about the Macedonian community in Australia, but I think that kind of falls into this last bullet that I have, which is they also have a lot of existing government support for multilingualism, and so they're able to maintain some of these connections even though they are far away through the support that is provided at the government level. Coronavirus impact has really also been, in my view, kind of watching what's happening, a guiding force among online resources, because now even people in Macedonia are trying to social distance. So they're trying to work more on their online presence, more about connecting online. And for children who are going to school, of course, they're not able to go into physical school anymore. So they are working more on online resources, which we from the diaspora can also use for our own learning or for our children's learning. So that has definitely been a positive force. As we turn to look at some of the resources that I'll show you today, kind of as a starting point of our conversation, I want to mention that the most popular ones are based on socialbakers.com, which is a website where I've found a ranking on Facebook of Facebook groups by popularity. But some of the ones that we're going to talk about are things that I just happen to know about. And feel free to add yours in the comments if you think that there are certain ones that are useful and that meet this criteria. And the first criteria is authenticity. I've found some resources, especially ones that deal with multiple languages, like 50 languages or 100 languages, where it's really done by machine translation and the authenticity is horrible. No native speaker would admit that something that's on a website like that is actually actual Macedonian. Yes, maybe it's a translation, but that's just not how a native speaker would say something. I'm also looking at pedagogical merit. Does it facilitate learning? Is it culture rich? Is it motivating? Because sometimes, again, going back to some of these machine translations, maybe even the language is correct, that is the grammar that we would say, but it does not have that element of culture or of our cultural products that make it truly Macedonian. It could be applied to any country. The third thing that I'm looking at is really quality, both in content and presentation. Is it grammatical? Is it comprehensible? Is it usable? Even using dialect or archaic words is fine if that's noted. But if it's misrepresented or if it's presented as standard when in fact it is not, then that's a ding in my book. Really, we want to understand the context in which we can use these words or phrases or this grammar. And I have some additional criteria for social media. The popularity, number of followers, as I mentioned, is important in what I was presenting here today. but also that there's frequent updates on in these social media groups. So not basically, it's a steady stream for you to keep abreast of issues and practice your language. And lastly, I wanted to make sure that whatever they post is predominantly Macedonian. There's a lot of groups in Macedonia that just repost things that are in English or other languages. And so that's not as useful if you're trying to visit these groups in order to maintain your Macedonian. Having looked at that, let's next look at Facebook as some examples of social media, of the social media platform. This is actually the most popular social media platform in Macedonia. And while you're looking at that, I'm going to plug in my computer because it just told me that it's low.
Well, while you're doing that, Biljana, in case, yeah, I think one of the individuals in our chat, Tony, is asking about the examples, and so you're providing these right now. But yeah, please continue.
Okay. All right. So one thing that I found with social networks is that they're great if you're in the know, if you know what to search for. But if not, they're very hard to find. So that's why I kind of prepared this list of some place to start. And then you can expand by following some of the groups that have been shared or reposted, or following certain people with whom you see that you're constantly agreeing with, or they're sharing useful posts. And so I've listed a few topics here, but if you're interested in a particular topic, let me know and I can help find you a group to join. I've listed here some for current events, entertainment, food. There has been an entire group of groups on Facebook that are women's issues. And so if you are interested in particular women's issues, then some of these groups might be more interesting to you. For most of them, the name of the group is actually in the URL. So for the first one, grid.mk, A1 is a television in Macedonia. For the second one, the third one is Motika, which is an entertainment website, motika.com.mk. The food one, Moji recepti, my recipes. And the second one is Zdrava hrana, zdravi deca, healthy food for healthy children. The women-focused ones, the first one is Ženski domatinski muhabeti is the full name, women's household conversations. And then the second one, you don't see the name here, but it's Internacionalki. So it's a group of internationally minded women. So those of us who live abroad, but also some from Macedonia who are internationally minded. And then the last two are for matters of the language. They're sometimes the most humorous for me because that first one, especially is called Puzdar pravam od makedonski jazik, which in loose translation is I'm making a mess out of the Macedonian language. So we often see questions and screen shares and pictures of ways in which in Macedonia and around the world, Macedonian is actually broken or improperly used. And then the second one is Prihvatilište za preveduvači, the place where the translator's home, let's say home for orphans of translation. And so there you might be able to ask some questions about a particular word or get some more resources about why a particular phrase is translated in a particular way. Do we have any questions about these Facebook resources?
Well, one of the questions from Nada was if we could get the links for
sure.
So we'll definitely provide that to the audience in the summary write-up for sure. Yeah.
Well, then I'll continue with YouTube. YouTube is another popular platform where I go to often to watch things that I used to watch when I was a kid in Macedonia, but also to watch new things. So what you have here, the first few links are basically playlists of movies and series. Some of them, those of you who maybe lived in Macedonia a while ago, like Volšebnoto Samarče, perhaps will mean something to you, Slovenski Patardi, and so on. Some of the old stuff, but also some newer things. So that first link had movies as recently as maybe 4 or 5 years ago, full movies that you can watch. The third bullet, the series Familijata Markovski, is something that Dr. Kramer actually mentioned in her talk. So I thought I would give you the link here as I started watching it recently as well. And it's very, very true to present day life in Macedonia, I think. So it allowed me to kind of connect to the Svakodnevie, the everyday life in Macedonia. And then the next ones are series and playlists for children. The first two, Svetot na Bibi and Bonton, are cartoons that are produced in Macedonia. The third link, Children's Stories, is a channel that actually the Macedonian Language e-learning center has, where we record bedtime stories for children. So, prikaz za dobra noć. And we've also connected with children in Macedonia that are reading some stories that they would be reading in their normal life as well, but they're recorded. And so children here abroad can, in the diaspora, can also watch them. And the last two links, Skynet and Pet Plus, actually fall in that category that I was talking about, things that are now much more popular thanks to coronavirus, in that as the children are not going to school, some of the videos that are recorded for them to watch on TV instead of going to school have also been made available online. So you're able to see them at these two links here.
Juliana,
Yes.
Similar to Familia de Markovsky, have you heard of this TV series called Prespav?
I have not.
Yeah, so it's I guess the meaning is I overslept, and so it's actually, I think, based at a hotel in the Lake Prespa area, but it's an interesting series that I saw.
It's a play on words.
Yeah, and so I saw it on YouTube a couple of weeks ago, I think around the time when I saw the Markovsky. So
yeah, I'll have to check it out. Maybe we can add it to this list. Any other thoughts about YouTube and using YouTube for language maintenance?
I think we're good on questions. Please proceed.
All right, so then the next category that I have here is reference websites. So these are things that maybe you didn't know exist, and even I am always surprised when I find things, but I'm always very pleasantly surprised and excited. So I'm really excited to share them with you if you don't know about them already. The first one is the Digital Dictionary of Macedonian, makedonski.info. And this is where you can type in a word in Macedonian and it'll come up with a definition and synonyms. And you can even click on a particular link where it tells you how frequent it is in the Macedonian language, gives you examples from literature, gives you short sentences that you can kind of see how it's used. So I really enjoy this very much. And it's all based on Blaže Koneski's dictionary. So it's very much the standard Macedonian. If you're ever wondering what's the word, what does this word mean, I would look it up there, especially if your Macedonian is good enough to be able to understand the translation from using other Macedonian words. So it's not a Macedonian to English dictionary, it's just Macedonian to Macedonian. So if you want to look up how to use a particular word with examples. Second one, Fleximac, is a website where you can provide a verb from the dictionary and it automatically conjugates it for you. So it'll give you present tense, past tense, whatever you need, you can just pick out from all of the possible forms. The third one, you can type in a Macedonian word or phrase and it will actually read it for you, pronounce it for you so you can hear how that's pronounced. And that one's based on artificial intelligence and machine learning, but it was developed by a Macedonian, a native Macedonian. And so to me, from me trying to break it so far, is because I have that kind of a not mean streak, but I try to look for trouble. It seems to be working pretty well, and it's pronouncing things, especially on the shorter side. If you have a word or a phrase, it's pronouncing them very well, and you can understand it and kind of learn the pronunciation. The next one is a Macedonian word, phrase, sentence, or paragraph, or even a document that you can paste into the space in the website, and it automatically corrects typos for you. So you can kind of hover over the word that it's highlighted as potentially a typo, and it'll give you some suggestions. Just like a Word program would do for you in English, if you're just using Word, this just does it on this particular website, typo.mk. And the last one here is slightly different than the ones that I was just talking about here. And it kind of goes with the Macedonian Language e-Learning Center mission of really capturing culture and not just teaching you the language, but teaching you the language through culture. We have a list of Macedonian traditional children's games and how they are played, what words are said while you're playing them. And so you can go to this link if you're interested in some of these, reminding yourself maybe on what your grandmother used to play or play with you. Or you played as a child if you immigrated more recently. So that's a list there that you can see things like Tapshi Tanana, for example, if you're familiar with that one, or Dvera Chichki, if you're familiar with that one, and Lastic, if you're familiar with playing that, where you spell out the word Mississippi, M-I-S-S-I-P-I-A, and things like that. Looking at language learning now, there's many websites that I've listed here for language learning, and the one on the top, kind of number one, is of course the Macedonian Language e-Learning Center. And I will talk a little bit more about what distinguishes this one from some of the others. But Victorian School of Languages in Australia also has a website with Macedonian materials. There's about 4 or 5 units. They're mostly for younger children. So they teach the alphabet, they teach Kakosi, my name is, colors, and some things like that. But their materials are very interesting because they're interactive. And also you can print out PDFs for children to work on their own pace, at their own pace as well. And it's free. The next one is also free, and it's e-textbooks from Macedonia on issue.com. And there you would just click on the book and you would be able to look through it online. FunkyMacedonian.com is a paid subscription service, but it can teach you some phrases or can teach your loved ones some phrases. And the interesting thing about this website is that it's based on different communities. So if you're learning because of a loved one, it'll kind of take you down one path. If you're learning more business Macedonian, it'll take you down a different path. The next one, I believe, was also mentioned during the last session of Dr. Kramer talking, learn-mk.com. It's free, and it's only a grammar tutorial. And lastly, Dr. Kramer's University of Toronto Macedonian course, which comes with the book that you can purchase from Amazon.com. What makes our materials a little bit different than what you can find on some of those other websites? Well, number one, we are the only award-winning resources. We won the Computer Assisted Language Instruction Consortium Award for Access to Language Education in 2012. And the reason I'm very proud of this is because that really points to our pedagogical basis for how we create our tutorials, so that it's not just a bunch of words or just an explanation of grammar. We're really taking a pedagogical approach that's built on language learning theory. And it's comprehensive. We have grammar, we have vocabulary, we have conversation, we have culture. It's gradual. We take you step by step, adding on a little bit, a level above where you are at each step. And this is in language learning and language acquisition, the I+1 language theory. We reinforce what you're learning through repetition. We have quizzes, we have games that you can play, conversational context with dialogues and text you can read and hear read to you. It's interactive, and so that means that you're actively trying to learn what you're trying to use what you're learning. The multimedia, audio, video, text in Macedonian is all present and integrated within the materials, and there's vocabulary that's presented on the side so that we don't give you the direct translation into English, but we kind of make you work for it, which makes it stick more in your brain. And it's free. It's been free since 2007. It's been funded by people's donations. So those of you who have already donated to our cause and maybe on this call, thank you. You have actually made it possible for us to continue to provide this service free for people. And really that all builds up to our goal that we are pedagogically sound and technologically up to date. And that is what we're working on right now, kind of as next steps. As technology is constantly changing, it's really difficult to keep up. So some of these materials that I had on the previous page will no longer work after technology changes, like Flash. I don't know if you're familiar, but it's going away by the end of the year. So all of those materials have to be recreated in some other form that will be available still after the end of this year. And that is unfortunately the group that we are in as well. So more than 100 tutorials that we have on our website are going to have to be reworked so that they are working in the newest technologies. But that is our goal. That's what we're trying to do, pedagogically sound materials that help people actually learn and technologically up to date that make it interesting and take advantage of today's advances. And this is a picture of some of the things that we have on our website. So here at the top left is a game that we play to reinforce learning the numbers, where you get to pick how many scoops of ice cream you want on your ice cream in a cone or in a cup. Below it is where we reinforce the alphabet and the order of the letters in the alphabet by dragging and dropping the wagons on a particular train. And then for a little bit more adult learners, we have Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, which I myself enjoy playing. And as I was preparing this, I actually got distracted a little bit and started playing this game. In the middle is what our homepage, our landing page is for our website. So when you go to macedonianlanguage.org, this is what you see, and that can guide you from here to some of the other materials that we have. And on the right are 4 children's books that we have published. And these are really what also funds all of the rest of the materials that we have online and keeps us going in addition to our donations from month to month, being able to pay our hosting fees and so on.
Juliana, if I could just chime in here, I actually, I was fortunate when you were able to come to Washington, and I purchased those books and actually gave them to my niece. And they're extremely helpful. And I encourage those that have children, nieces, nephews, definitely purchasing these books. They're really helpful.
Thanks. Yeah, so far we've gotten some really good feedback from people who are using these books and whose kids are enjoying it. And I even people are on here who don't speak Macedonian, or because they're Macedonian English, they're bilingual, they're reading the English side to their kids, and they just really enjoy the illustrations. And we've gotten really good feedback about the quality of these resources.
Would you mind elaborating a little bit more on the resources for, children, the online Macedonian, like, do you hold Macedonian classes? Sharon in our chat is asking.
Yeah, so for children, really I find that with my own kids, again, starting from myself, I find that they have not responded as well with online, working with a group online. So really the impetus is on the parent to kind of help them along to introduce these kinds of books, for example. So as we're reading English books, we're reading also Macedonian books, and maybe pointing out things that are similar, or pointing out the topics that are similar. For what we have online for children are mostly games, like what you're seeing here at the top left of the screen. And so for my kids, that's been a lot of fun, because if you live in a community like I do, where there's not really a lot of Macedonian speakers around us, and I'm the only one that's ever using Macedonian with them, they tend to think that this is just a language that their mom made up. I literally had my 5-year-old many years ago tell me, when I asked her, "Zašto ne sakaš da zbuduješ makedonski so mene? Why won't you speak Macedonian with me?" She said, "It's not real." To her, this is just something that I made up, and I was the only one that was ever saying it. And so using the exercises on the website, the games on the website, just provides another voice, even though it's actually my voice that's on there. For them, it was enough disembodied from seeing me that it was helpful for them. It was yet another source of this weird language that their mom was using. And so the exercises that we have, the games that we have on the website are predominantly for children. We have some games that you can learn if you don't know yourself from growing up there. You can learn and practice with your kids, just yourself, kind of face to face as you're going through your day-to-day lives. I've taught my kids many games that are even sometimes nonsense words, but they're Macedonian nonsense words, and they are part of the culture that I grew up with. And so I would like them to know it, and someday, pass it on to their kids, and maintain that connection with Macedonian culture. And of course, the books are also available for sale on the website. The tutorials themselves for learning Macedonian, I think, are appropriate maybe for a little bit older children, and maybe it's just my kids that are not quite able to be self-motivated enough to sit there by themselves and use these tutorials. But certainly when I sit with them, they're able to do it and enjoy it very much, because they are very multimedia, very interactive. They have little kids that are coming across the screen, and especially the games like the ice cream and the train, and there's a few others that I didn't have pictured here. They really enjoy playing with them. Does that help?
Yeah, I definitely think so.
Okay, great. Looking at another world of set of resources, apps, I have seen a few dictionaries and radio apps that exist. Lately, again, going back to the resources that are new now with coronavirus, there's a new app, Coronavirus MK, that you could download, and it gives you updates on the Macedonian status for coronavirus. But I can't recommend any that I've seen for language learning. And this is a big gap that the Macedonian Language Learning Center would like to work on filling. Currently, this is a difficult area to get into, just because the price point for entering the app development and app availability field of expertise is quite big. You have to really know, you have to have a lot of funds to be able to train yourself and then be able to apply so that you can sell some of these apps. So, but this is something we'd like to work on filling. And if you'd like to collaborate with us on this, if you are an app developer, we'd love your help. Let us know, please contact us, and we'd love to share kind of some ideas that we have, and maybe we can both benefit from it, as well as the world of Macedonian learners and users. But I was able to find some examples of poor quality materials, going back to my earlier point that I was trying to make about how sometimes machine learning really we can say that this is wrong. It's not just a dialect, this is wrong. One example is this Macedonian English Dictionary app that actually gets 4 stars, but on the actual screen where you are trying to decide from the screenshots whether or not this is something that you want to buy, they have this translation of easterly as istok. And in English, of course, it's an adjective, it's an adverb, it could be a noun meaning a wind from the east, but istok does not cover any of those. Istok is just the noun for east, right? The side of the world called east. It cannot be an adjective, it cannot be an adverb. You have to change the ending of that to make it into filling these grammatical roles that they've described here for English. So not so good in terms of quality, right? Here's another example. Here, what I've underlined in red, I'm not sure if you can see, but it's trying to teach you how to pronounce some of these words. So for the word Eden, which is the number 1, of course, they've actually added a Y, so it's Yedian. Nobody in Macedonia pronounces Eden as Yedian, like not even in any dialect, right? So that's just plain wrong. Or Chetiri, or Piet, or Shiest, or Siedum, or Dieviet, or Trieti, the way that they have described it here with the Y. So we just have to be very careful about using something like this and recommending something like this, and guard our word, our language, from apps like this that are trying to capitalize on that lack of resources and presenting something that's not vetted, that's just simply incorrect. I've listed here also a few resources for learning about Macedonia. One of these, the third bullet, was something that came up on the conversation with Dr. Kramer, and I had not known about it before. So now I have it listed in my list here. But the first 2 are websites where you can research and learn more about Macedonia, Istražia Macedonia and Macedonia Timeless. Both have texts in Macedonian as well as very high quality videos of events that are popular part of culture in Macedonia. So even me, who used to live there, didn't know about some of these things, and they're just interesting to learn more about the various aspects of culture that live in all of Macedonia. That third one, Macedonia from Above, as I mentioned, was something that was mentioned in Dr. Kramer's talk, and it's aerial view of parts of Macedonia, and then you can even go kind of as a 360 view and view some of the monuments and some of the galleries, memorial galleries that we have. The fourth one I thought would be interesting because of the conversations that we had in both with Dr. Friedman and with Dr. Kramer, dialekti.manu.edu.emk, which has a lot of different links, including to parts of websites where texts in particular dialects are read, so you can hear what that dialect sounds like. And then the last one is the Macedonian Encyclopedia, macedonism.org. It's also a new website I was not aware of until very recently. And even me, again, who grew up in Macedonia, found some notes here in the Macedonian Encyclopedia about persons, very famous figures from Macedonian history that I didn't know very much, if anything, about. So it's just an interesting way to read about aspects of Macedonia and Macedonian culture, Macedonian history.
These are amazing, websites, online resources that you're providing. And one of the participants, Robert Nooses from Toronto, asked, as someone who you used to be able to speak Macedonian well, and now struggling to speak it fluently, what are some additional tips for self-teaching the language and learning Cyrillic?
Yeah, that's a great question. So number one, I would encourage you to change the language of your devices to Macedonian. Now we have advanced technology enough that on your phone, on your computer, you can actually select to have a menu in Macedonian, and that'll force you to just see that day in and day out and practice. On our website, if you are not so confident with the Cyrillic language, on our website we actually have a tutorial that you can download that teaches you the letters, and it's kind of a 5-unit tutorial in stages. You could do 1 per day, and that kind of gives you a starting point, and then from there, just seeing it, using it, I think will help you with the alphabet itself be able to use it and read it. I have taught the alphabet to my kids using materials that I've developed for the Macedonian Language Learning Center. And it took them about a week. And now they still are not like 100% sure about some of the letters, especially, there's some that are easily confused. But in all of the classes that I've taught and that I've seen, people usually can get the alphabet in a week to 2 weeks max. So it's not a long-term commitment for that. The more long-term commitment is for keeping on top of vocabulary, just adding more and more vocabulary as you go and not forgetting the old vocabulary that you learned. And the more you can surround yourself with Macedonian artifacts that kind of force you to keep that on the forefront of your mind, to use it rather than lose it, I think that'll be more and more helpful. In terms of conversations, if you have someone that you can converse with in Macedonian, even if it's broken Macedonian, that would be better. The more you kind of practice pulling that information from the back of your mind to the forefront, the better it will be. Some of my students, I've recommended that, for example, if you are married to a Macedonian or going out with a Macedonian, if you have a significant other who is Macedonian, to start by picking a room in the house where that's the Macedonian room. When you enter that room, it's like you're in Macedonia and you have to use Macedonian. So maybe a good place to start with is the kitchen. There's a lot of vocabulary you could learn for the kitchen, from cooking, from vegetables, fruits, and any other kitchen conversations that you might have. And so kind of getting yourself in the habit to use the language, to be surrounded with artifacts that remind you to use the language and keep that on the forefront of your mind. I think those are some tips that I would have for you.
Wow. And I love that about the kitchen, and definitely pick a room. I think that's genius. Philip Yotevsky from Washington asks a similar question. What are advantages, disadvantages of growing up with Macedonian in a diaspora community, but never studying the grammar rules of the language? What is the best way to become proficient in that situation? And then kind of follow up is, what's the best way? I think it's a kind of a, to learn Bitolski grammar, particularly if you come from Bitola, right?
Yeah. So this actually is a multi-parted question.
And he also
kind of started
the lessons in the past.
Yeah, let me start at the end. So because Macedonian is one of these languages that's just not spoken very much in the world, it falls into this group that we in teaching call the less commonly taught languages. And so there's less resources for them, there's less funding for them. And because it's in this group, unfortunately, we have to provide materials for the standard language. So normally students of Macedonian learn the standard first. And then we kind of say, okay, if you're only interested in Bitolski, kind of go above and beyond what you've learned for the standard and distinguish now what is a particular dialect do differently than the standard. And that's simply because if we were teaching every dialect, we just would not be able to create enough materials to do it justice. And so we kind of have this middle ground where we teach everybody the standard, and then we say, okay, you're interested in Kumanovsky in particular, now let's forget all this that we taught you and learn this other stuff that will apply to the Kumanovsky dialect, or all these things that will apply to Bitolski. Of course, the standard is based on the South Central dialects, so the closer you are to Veles, for example, and that group of dialects, that then it'll be easier to transition because that is more or less what we're talking about in the standard. But the prestige dialect of Skopje, for example, because it's the capital, it also kind of has a pull, especially in media. So I've actually, for my dissertation, I had people who I was interviewing who said, I learned the standard language and now I'm in this other situation in a dialect where like none of those things apply. What language are these people talking? And so there's those kinds of moments of frustration among learners as well. But unfortunately, because of how Macedonian falls into this less commonly taught group, all of the resources, even the ones that I've presented today, most of them, other than this fourth length about dialects, will be for the standard. And it's kind of forcing you to listen to the standard and educate yourself in the standard, so that you become, especially if you grew up, kind of going back to the first question, if you grew up with a particular dialect like Bitolski, you become bidialectal in a sense. It's like a bilingual at a lower level, right? So you become bidialectal. You learn the standard and you're able to communicate in the standard, but you also have your home language of your dialect with whom you're able to communicate in your community or with your family where you've picked up that dialect. But if your goal is, kind of going back to the beginning of my presentation, if your goal is to go to Macedonia and be understood, be perceived as a member of the community of native speakers of Macedonian, the standard is really where you need to shine, where you need to kind of continue to work on beefing that up, understanding that, and keeping the dialect only for the areas where you know that that's what's expected of you as a speaker. Does that help, Philip?
I definitely think so. Well, please continue, Biliana. I'm sure there might be a couple of more questions in the meantime.
Yeah, so if there's more questions, please let me know. I think we're almost at the end of our time, but I did want to mention that if you want to continue this conversation, we can certainly do it on Facebook. I know that this is being live streamed on Facebook as well, so comments there, we'll be happy to reply. And on YouTube, where our channel is, where we have our playlist for kids, you're more than welcome to put some comments there as well. You can email us at info@macedonianlanguage.org. And I'll be happy to reply to anything like that. And I wanted to thank you all for coming, show you our website again, to encourage you to come visit the website and write to us also through the comment section of the website. And if anybody would like to see more of our materials on the website, I'd be happy to show them to you, more than happy to show them to you and kind of guide you through the elements of our website. Just contact us and I'll be happy to do that.
Excellent. Well, Biliana, if you could elaborate perhaps on, I mean, I think you touched on, some challenges that you're having. One is, I think, the financial. Two is getting, your resources into some kind of app that will be available to everybody to download on their iPhone or Android or whatnot. It would be fantastic on an iPad or whatever. But what are some of the key, kind of explain more about the challenges you're facing in your work.
Yeah, I think the major challenge is just finding contributors for these materials, because our standards are pretty high in terms of wanting high quality materials that are, pedagogically sound. And so oftentimes when we're developing these materials, it takes a long time. And I think Dr. Kramer also talked about her challenges in the same way. We develop these materials sometimes for years, sometimes for months. We fight tooth and nail to find funds. And then the technology changes, or we are no longer able to use that particular material for other reasons. And so you have to kind of start from scratch, and it's very discouraging. And this is not just me speaking. Certainly that's true in my personal experience, but talking to Dr. Kramer, talking to some of the members of our board of the Macedonian Language E-Learning Center, all of whom have authored things in their own right, whether it's language books or multimedia tutorials out there, or CDs, CD-ROMs, we all are experiencing this kind of pain of working and creating some materials and then it becoming obsolete. So that's probably the biggest pain that we feel. And then being able to turn back around and start again from scratch. Sometimes the materials we've developed, we can't even transform them into something better. We just have to start from scratch. And that can be very discouraging, and a lot of people like me who are interested in continuing this and providing these kinds of resources, we kind of work, create something. And after a while, when you keep recreating the same thing, it just kind of becomes very discouraging, and what makes you want to not do it anymore. And unfortunately, a lot of people are in that boat. Were you going to say something, Mita?
Well, just to, there's just a couple of more questions that are coming in. And, I definitely think, with all the IT professional people that exist in Macedonia, I hope that we can find somebody that would be able to, obviously, it's very difficult to find volunteers to do this, but if there are volunteers that want to support this, because it's up to us to preserve the language, it's up to us to promote it. Don't expect anybody, else. And so one of the audience participants, Christina Dojchinova, said she'd like actually to make a suggestion, is maybe the Macedonian Language E-Learning Center can organize a Macedonian Sunday school type of online lessons for Macedonian kids in North America, subscription-based and running throughout the school year. And she says that she has at least 2 little ones that would enroll.
Yeah, I have a little one that would enroll too. Yeah, and actually, I've heard this over the years as I've met with some of the UMD representatives, even in communities where there is a Macedonian church, for example, that they would welcome this kind of material, being able to for the kids while people are at church or while they are in that building to be able to engage in learning Macedonian. And we're doing a little bit of a pilot program for that. Through the United Macedonian Diaspora and the Macedonian Language E-Learning Center. In fact, this coming Saturday, we're going to have our first 30-minute lesson for children that are ages 10 and younger, where we're going to start introducing some of the parts of the body. And we're going to, again, I'm very big on pedagogy, so I want to make sure that it is pedagogically sound. We're going to sing a song about the parts of the body. We're going to look at some pictures and name parts of the body. We're going to use our own bodies to touch and kind of make sure that we're comprehending the vocabulary that we're learning. And so this is going to be our pilot to see how it goes this coming Saturday, followed by the next lesson the following Saturday when we're going to talk about colors. So depending on how that goes, maybe this is a good direction for us to take some of our materials and some of the services that we offer. And maybe just even through spreading the word through media like this, if there are teachers out there that are interested in helping us with this, maybe come to the first two just to see how it goes and what are our standards. And then maybe they can also help with running this, because one person cannot sustain this for a long time. But if we have help, then certainly we can.
And thank you. And I'm really excited. I'll circulate that to everybody that's participating tonight for Saturday, the 18th and the 25th for Macedonian children. And I know few on the program tonight will have their children participate. And I know hopefully my niece will participate as well. And one thing kind of that now kind of going to what's going on in Macedonia in terms of the Macedonian language, there's a question, a comment from Biljana Nikovska, who is the founder of a language center in Macedonia called besedi.mk. She's a language teacher, editor, translator. You probably know her. And she said, Macedonian language teachers in Macedonia face the lack of systematic approach to teaching the Macedonian as a foreign or non-native. An urging need is a center specialized to give support to these teachers, i.e. a center that will provide all the information teachers of Macedonian need, also regular periodical training, conferences, meetings, teaching resources, tests. And there is something, but there is something, but there is no system or no unified approach. And she says that and she underlines an active center specialized for this could help overcome this problem that the teachers of Macedonian struggle with within Macedonia. And so
that's great. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. We actually had that idea, not so much in Macedonia, because I figured that, especially with funding from the government, there was more there, but certainly for us teachers here in the diaspora. So one of the sections of our website is this teach button, where we have made public some of the materials that we ourselves, or that I use when I tutor, and what other teachers have sent me. So can you see right now what I'm showing on the website? I just want to make sure that yeah, good.
Yes.
And so we have certain PDFs by grammar topic, by medium, such as songs, movies, literary works, and then of course games that students can play. But I would be very interested, Biljana, I have not met you, but I would love to maybe have a conversation about, is there something that we can contribute with some of the things that we already have to help that cause? And if not, is there somewhere we can collaborate to create some of those materials together? So thank you.
Amazing, amazing. Well, Biljana, any final thoughts before we conclude?
Well, I just want to thank you all for coming, because as you may have heard me already say, sometimes this work feels a little bit lonely, like you're putting out things out there in the world and you're not really sure, are they even being used? Certainly, are there people from Macedonian descent or people in Macedonia who would be interested in this kind of service? So just the sheer numbers of who came here today is very encouraging for me to keep working on this stuff, to keep providing these kinds of materials for people to use. So please reach out and make me feel like somebody's actually using this stuff. And I mean, I know that a lot of people are because I see the traffic, but hearing those personal stories really keep me motivated, keep our board members motivated to keep giving and to keep working on this cause. So thank you in advance.
Biljana, your passion and energy for Macedonian language learning is impeccable, and I hope that this conversation tonight motivates more people to get involved in the work of the Macedonian Language e-Learning Center, and folks that have children that will then take advantage of the programs and the books, the tutorials that you have worked so hard on. And I know, I mean, you were really helpful to us when we were developing our Macedonian language school in Washington. And, you know, in addition to the dozens of people, you know, watching, I mean, you also have dozens watching on Facebook actually throughout the whole program. And so I know that more and more people are going to learn about this. And I know several in Australia that are just waking up or they're starting their morning. They're going to be watching this as well. And so I personally want to thank you for everything that you're doing to promote and preserve the Macedonian language abroad. So thank you very much, Biljana.
Thanks so much for this opportunity, and thank you all for coming.
Thank you. For our audience, just as a heads up, and again, I'm going to repeat this, on Saturday, July 18th and Saturday, July 25th at 11:30, we're going to have a program with Biljana for about 30 minutes for Macedonian children. The first session will be on body parts, as she said, and the second session will be on colors. And so I encourage all of you to participate with your children. It's going to be a fun program. We also have a separate, and if you want to test out some of the knowledge that Biljana was talking about in the encyclopedia, we are actually doing a Macedonia trivia night on this Thursday, believe it or not, on July 16th at 9 p.m. US Eastern Time. And so you're going to be able to test out your knowledge. We had a really awesome Macedonian trivia night back in May of this year, and we're going to have another one on Thursday. And so anybody that is participating, please, or would like to participate, please reach out or check out UMD or Generation M's Facebook page. With that, thank you all for watching on Facebook. Thank you all for participating tonight. If you have any ideas for future events, please feel free to reach out at info@umdiaspora.org. And if you have any ideas or suggestions or recommendations for people that can help build an app for Macedonian language, please reach out to Biljana. Again, thank you very much, Biljana. Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful night or morning, day in Australia. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.